Russian President Vladimir Putin thought that the Ukraine invasion he launched in February 2022 was finally going his way in 2024. Russia was making significant gains, but now that momentum has been flipped on its head. Ukraine is stopping Russia cold as Putin's gains in Ukraine have plunged to a 5-month low. The momentum has shifted so quickly that even the Kremlin is shocked at how hard and fast Ukraine is pushing back. Putin's forces have just hit a wall, and this time it may be a wall that they have no chance of breaking through. On April 7, Jonathan Lowe shared some interesting statistics in his blog, The Lowdown. He noted that Russia's advances in Ukraine have fallen to their lowest and slowest rate since late 2024, culminating in March 2025, showcasing a massive reduction in the amount of territory Putin's forces have managed to capture. Those claims are backed by the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW. Using geolocated footage, the ISW says that Russia managed to capture around 242 square miles of Ukraine's territory in November 2024. By March 2025, the Russian progress rate had slowed down to the point where Putin claimed just 78 square miles. That's over 3 times less than the territory Russia snatched up in November. Putin's progress through Ukraine may not have been halted entirely, but it's slowed to such a crawl that Russia's forces are practically making almost no progress at all. And this isn't a one-time issue. Russia wasn't capturing roughly 242 square miles of Ukraine per month up until March, only to experience a steep drop-off. This is a trend. For instance, December 2024 saw Russia capture about 223 square miles of Ukraine, nearly 20 square miles more than the previous month. In January, the ISW says Russia took around 162 square miles, with February delivering just 138 square miles to Putin's forces. Month on month, Russia's advance is being slowed down while Putin continues to send more of his soldiers into the meat grinder he's created in Ukraine. Which leads to an interesting point. Russia's slowdown has nothing to do with Putin dedicating fewer of his soldiers to the front line. The Russian military's casualty rate is still astronomically high. In November 2024, Russia suffered 45,680 casualties to gain around 240 square miles of territory, creating a casualty rate of 1,522 soldiers per day. Or, to put it more bluntly, Russia lost 190 soldiers for every square mile of territory it gained in November. By March, the Russian casualty rate had slightly decreased. Pravda reported that Russia lost 1,230 soldiers on March 30. If we assume similar figures for the rest of the month, that means Russian losses fell to 38,130. Still a massive figure, by also around 7,000 less than the losses seen in November. However, don't let that decline in Russian casualties fool you. When we take those losses in the context of the territory Russia gained, they're massive. Russia is now losing 488 soldiers for every square mile of Ukraine it claims. That's 2.5 times more Russian soldiers dying or being injured compared to November 2024. And it gets worse for Putin. It seems that the ISW's figures may be conservative. Russia's Ukraine gains may have slowed at even a greater pace than the ISW claims. That's according to both Newsweek and The Lowdown, which note that the British Ministry of Defence, or MOD, has published its own figures focusing on the Great Russian Slowdown. The MOD says that Russia only managed to claim 55 square miles of Ukraine in March, not 78 square miles. That would make Putin's casualty rate even worse, 693 soldiers lost for every square mile of territory gained. The MOD's figures for Russia's territorial gains were also lower than the ISW's across the board. It says that Russia claimed a little under 154 square miles of Ukraine in December 2024, rather than 223. By January, the MOD's figures say Russia dropped to 125 square miles and down again to 77 square miles in February. Again, both are much lower than the ISW's estimates, with the February numbers even being lower than the ISW's March numbers. The Lowdown notes that this discrepancy likely comes from the different methodologies the ISW and MOD use to determine their figures. However, the reality is that the discrepancy doesn't matter. Whichever way you look at it, Russia's gains in Ukraine are stalling out so fast it's enough to make Putin's head spin. And it even gets worse for Russia when you look at its gains from 2024. On January 8, Al Jazeera published an analysis of the Ukraine war in 2024. Using figures pulled from the ISW, it determined that Russia managed to gain 1,609 square miles of territory during the year. That amounts to an average of around 134 square miles per month, though as noted before, the latter months of the year saw Russia accelerate its territorial gains. During the same period, the ISW said that Russia experienced 434,000 casualties, with 150,000 of its soldiers being killed in action. That's already a massive casualty rate. It works out to around 36,166 Russian troops taken out of the war per month, which roughly matches the monthly loss rate seen in March 2025. Again, Russia's losses were higher toward the end of 2024, though it was also claiming more of Ukraine when making those losses. Still, this gives us two key figures: 134 square miles per month in exchange for the lives of 36,166 soldiers per month. That gives us a rate of almost 270 soldiers lost for every square mile of territory Russia gained in Ukraine during 2024. If we use the ISW's figures, Russia's casualty rate per square mile of territory has almost doubled. If the MOD is accurate, the picture is even worse for Putin. He's losing 2.5 times the number of troops to claw a square mile out of Ukraine than he was during the entirety of 2024. All of this is happening as Putin claims that Russia holds the strategic initiative across the front line. But the numbers don't lie. Russia has no initiative, it has no momentum. Putin's strategy of just throwing more and more people at his Ukraine invasion simply isn't working anymore. What does all of this mean for Putin's Ukraine invasion? Right now, Russia occupies about 20% of Ukraine's territory, meaning there's another 80% to go. Ukraine is about 233,100 square miles, and 80% of that means Putin's forces have to capture another 186,480 square miles before Putin can claim his invasion is a success. Given that Russia may be taking as little as 55 square miles of Ukraine per month, it will take Russia literal decades to overrun Ukraine. If we use the MOD's figures, we have Russia currently on pace to take around 660 square miles of Ukraine annually. Divide that figure by the 186,480 square miles of Ukraine still left to claim, and you get 282 years. The lowdown, along with the ISW, is more conservative with its estimates. Taking into account potential ebbs and flows in the Ukraine war, the ISW suggests that Russia will only take 83 years to fully control Ukraine at the pace it's going in 2025. In either case, the reality that Vladimir now faces is that he'll be long dead by the time Russia controls Ukraine, assuming it manages to win the war in the first place. Which begs the question, why has the pace of Russia's gains slowed to the point where we can legitimately call Putin's invasion a stalemate? The lowdown suggests several reasons, starting with a spate of Ukrainian counterattacks that have taken place in 2025. Again, pulling from the ISW, the lowdown says that recent weeks have seen Ukraine launch localized counteroffensives in several regions, including Pokrovsk and Toretsk. Those counteroffensives were made possible by Ukraine capturing several settlements in its own territory back from Russia earlier in the year. Rewind to January 2025, and early indications suggest that all of this was about to happen. It was in that month that the new Voice of Ukraine reported that Ukraine had retaken ground in Toretsk and Kasiv Yar. At the time, those Ukrainian counterattacks were weighed against Russia retaking territory in the Kursk Oblast, along with several other Ukrainian regions. However, they indicated that Ukraine wasn't content to sit back and absorb Russia's attacks. More recently, we've seen Ukraine make advances near Borova, along with a small village in Luhansk. The latter is especially notable. Luhansk has long been one of Putin's strongholds in Ukraine, with the oblast being home to pro-Russian forces on which he leaned during his acts of aggression against Ukraine in 2014. If there was anywhere in the country that Putin might have considered safe, it was Luhansk. Ukraine's capture of a village in that territory, no matter how small it might seem, marked the first time in 3 years that Ukraine could claim ownership of any of Luhansk. And, as we're now seeing in Toretsk and Pokrovsk, Ukraine is going to use that small slice of captured territory to launch even more counterattacks that will see it reclaim some of what Russia has taken. Therein may lie the trick to slowing Russia's advances. While Putin's forces are pushed into fighting for territory as they face stern Ukrainian resistance, Ukraine is taking advantage of complacency and a lack of manpower in the Russian ranks. It's retaking its own territory, eating into Putin's gains in the process to severely limit the pace of the Russian advance. But it's not just smart Ukrainian counterattacks that are stifling Putin's forces. Another reality Russia's leader has to face is that he simply can't sustain the level of pressure he placed on Ukraine in 2024. That's because, according to the lowdown, Russia is running out of soldiers. And again, the statistics seem to back the claim. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, Russia has lost over 926,000 soldiers to death, injury, or capture since Putin launched his invasion in February 2022. That's an approximate loss rate of around 308,000 per year, though we saw from the figures shared early that 2024 saw much higher annual losses than that. The takeaway here is that Putin sacrificed hundreds of thousands of his troops to make the already meager gains he made in 2024. Those are all soldiers who can't fight for him in 2025. Putin is trying to alleviate this manpower pinch. In early April, he announced the latest round of Russian conscription, which will see 160,000 citizens called up to the Russian military. That's the most Putin has called up in a single conscription round since he started his invasion. Russia's leader also has to take into account the fact that these conscripts need to be trained, meaning they're unlikely to enter Ukraine until some point during the summer. And even when they arrive, these fresh conscripts will be utterly unused to the terrible conditions Putin has created on the Ukraine's war's front lines. Thousands of them will die or be injured, just like the many hundreds of thousands that have come before them. Russia has a lot of people. Global Firepower says the country has around 1.26 million people reaching military age each year, with available manpower that's fit for service currently numbering around 46.1 million. However, those numbers only matter in the context of Russia dedicating its full potential fighting force to Ukraine. Putin can't do that. No nation can. Any healthy country needs millions of people to run the nation itself, to operate businesses, keep the economy healthy, and generally not be dying on a battlefield hundreds of miles away from home. Thus, Putin is forced into a balancing act. He needs to keep a strong flow of soldiers so he can keep up his meat grinder tactics. However, he can't afford to send everybody available to Ukraine, as that would devastate Russia, even if it would mean Ukraine is overrun. So he conscripts where he can, with each conscription seeing fresh recruits replacing veteran soldiers who have died or been captured. The result is that Russia's fighting force grows weaker by the month, all while Putin repeatedly dips into a depleting supply of potential soldiers. Eventually, he's going to run out. And it's these manpower issues that are likely leading to Russia's advances slowing down in Ukraine. At least, it's one of the reasons the slowdown is happening. Another is that the soldiers Putin can field simply don't have the same amount or quality of equipment today as they did back in 2022. Take tanks as an example. It's already been well reported that Russia either hasn't fielded or has already lost many of its more modern battle tanks such as the T-90 and its variants. Putin responded to that by pulling Soviet-era tanks out of storage to send them to the Ukraine war's front lines. The problem he faces, as is the case with manpower, is that these stockpiles are running low. The cream of the crop of these older tanks, which are the thousands that were either already in working condition or only needed minimal repairs, have been sent to Ukraine. Most of them are no more. Ukraine has destroyed over 10,500 of Russia's tanks already, and Putin is running out fast. In February, Newsweek reported on figures from the International Institute of Strategic Studies, or IISS, which say that Russia lost 1,400 of its main battle tanks in 2024. That's a conservative estimate, with Ukraine claiming that the real figure is much higher. Whatever the case may be, Russia is on course to completely run out of usable tanks by the time 2026 rolls around. Consider what this means in the context of slowed down Russian gains. If Putin's invasion is going to last for another 83 years, running out of tanks in a year isn't going to do wonders for Russia's strategy. It'll force Putin to send more of his soldiers to assault Ukraine's defenses without any sort of mechanized armor, which can only mean one thing: more Russian soldiers dying for even lower gains. The situation doesn't get much better on the military vehicle and artillery fronts. Ukraine claims to have destroyed around 22,000 of Russia's armoured vehicles and nearly 26,000 of its artillery units. Putin faces the same problems with both as he does with his tanks. So many of his vehicles and artillery units in Ukraine are Soviet-era relics. The more of them that get destroyed, the more Putin has to pull from degraded stockpiles. Worse yet for Russia, spending on new equipment isn't going to help. Despite Putin's ploughing $145.9 billion into the Russian military in 2024, which represented a 42% increase over the amount spent in 2023, much of that money is going toward Russia's soldiers. Of course, plenty is also going to Russian manufacturing, but given that Russia can only build around 50 new tanks per month, Putin's hardly receiving the stockpiles he needs to replenish his depleted military, which has everything to do with Russia's slower rate of progress in 2025. Fewer tanks, armoured vehicles and artillery units on the field means that Russia's ground offences are weakened. Putin has to send more soldiers in on foot, or in some cases, riding quad bikes and scooters, making them easy pickings for Ukraine's drones, artillery and fortified soldiers. So Russia loses more people, it gains less ground, and the diminishing armoured units it can still send out are getting destroyed at an even faster rate. Putin is stuck in a vicious cycle thanks to his own strategy. He's burning through everything that made the Russian military strong on paper, and we're starting to see the results. And as if all that wasn't enough, Putin faces another problem: Ukraine's attacks on Russia's oil supplies. The lowdown points to these attacks as the third reason why Russia's territory gains have slowed down, and those attacks have been numerous and effective. According to the Atlantic Council, Ukraine's attacks on Russia's oil refining facilities had knocked out 10% of their capacity by February 2025. Those attacks are ongoing, so it's likely the percentage is even higher as April goes on. And those attacks matter for two reasons: relieving pressure and hitting Russia financially. On the pressure front, refined oil products include the likes of gasoline, diesel and aviation fuel, products that Russia needs to keep its tanks and armoured vehicles moving, along with ensuring its planes can take to the skies. Even if Russia wasn't dealing with an increasingly damaging equipment shortfall, the damage Ukraine has done to its oil supply lines still means that Putin's attacks on Ukraine are less effective than they were even last year. No refined oil means even functioning tanks and vehicles can't accompany Russia's human waves. Every plane that can't take to the skies is a plane that can't send Russia's glide bombs hurtling toward Ukraine's infrastructure. All of these oil attacks add up to the further weakening of Russia's army. Then there's the monetary front. The refined and crude oil Putin isn't using to fuel his military is often sold off to the highest bidder. The oil industry is huge for Russia. It made over $631 billion from crude and refined oil products between February 2022 and January 2025. A huge chunk of those billions get fed back into the Russian military, funding the hiring of new soldiers and the manufacturing of equipment. As Ukraine chips away at Russia's oil capacity, fewer of those sales get made and billions of dollars are pulled out of the collective Russian bank account. That's all money that can't go toward Putin's Ukraine invasion, which again amounts to a weakening of his military. And therein lies Putin's problem, as his invasion moves deeper into 2025. The slowdown in Russia's territorial gains isn't a one-off. They're a pattern that's only going to get worse because there's no singular cause on which Putin can focus to solve the problem. He's losing oil. He doesn't have enough people, tanks, armoured vehicles or artillery. And while Russia is dealing with this myriad of issues, Ukraine is employing strategic counterattacks to retake territory Russia previously gained, meaning Russia is losing ground at a time when it's trying to make more gains. What does this mean for the future of the Ukraine war? It's fair to say the war is at a stalemate, which is terrible for Putin. When he initially refused Ukraine's proposal for a ceasefire, he made claims that the momentum was with Russia, placing Putin in a position where he could negotiate from power. But the ISW and MOD's figures reveal that to be a lie. If anything, the momentum lies with Ukraine, as it's not in a position to push deeper into its occupied territories, snatching more land from Putin as his invasion falters. There is no easy solution to this problem for Russia, which means we may be seeing a reversal starting to play out to the point where Russia might start experiencing more losses than gains as we move deeper into 2025. But what do you think about Russia's slowdown? Is this a momentary blip as Putin's forces regroup, or a long-term pattern Russia won't be able to escape? What happens next in the Ukraine war? Share your thoughts with us in the comments, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more analysis of the Ukraine war. We're an independent source of up-to-date news and information about military conflicts around the globe, and very much appreciate your support.